Arya walked through the quiet street with calm steps, holding a small folder close to her arm as she returned from a long meeting that had stretched her energy more than she expected, yet she kept her posture steady because she always believed that dignity must stay with a person even when the day felt heavy, and she was ready to reach her car when a police cruiser slowed near the sidewalk, and two officers inside watched her with curious eyes that soon turned sharp because they thought they already knew everything about her just by looking at her, and they were wrong in many ways, but they did not understand that yet, and Arya paused only because they called out to her in a loud voice asking where she was going, and what she was carrying, as if it was strange for a woman to walk alone with a folder in her hand, and she answered politely in the same calm tone saying she was heading to her vehicle parked down the block, and she had no issue sharing that simple detail, but her gentle reply did not soften their approach because the officers seemed more interested in showing their authority than understanding her, and they stepped out of the car with slow heavy movements trying to make their presence feel larger, while one of them asked for her identification without any clear reason, and the other looked at her folder like he expected some hidden secret, yet Arya stayed steady and respectful because she never answered rudeness with anger, and she opened her handbag to take out her card. But the officers kept speaking in a way that suggested they doubted her ability or her place on the street, as if she did not belong, and Arya listened to their tone, which carried a sense of dismissal, although she kept her expression gentle because she had learned long ago that people often reveal more about themselves through the way they treat others, and she handed over her identification card with a steady hand while the officer looked at it with a smirk as if her name or appearance made him believe she was unimportant, though she carried a level of responsibility that neither of them imagined, and the second officer asked why she walked alone at that hour, even though the sun had not yet set, and the street was safe and familiar, and Arya answered with the same calm grace saying she had finished her work, and was heading home, but again they did not focus on her words because they had made their own assumptions and preferred to follow them, rather than look at the truth right in front of them, and one officer laughed lightly under his breath in a way that was meant to belittle, though Arya did not react because she knew her worth did not depend on their view, and time moved slowly in that moment, as the breeze brushed against her hair, and the sky shifted into warm colors while the officers continued questioning her without any genuine purpose, and Arya knew she could correct their behavior instantly simply by revealing who she truly was, but she chose patience instead because she believed that character showed more in silence than in swift announcements, and she let them continue their empty display of control while she waited for the right moment to speak, and the officers kept exchanging glances impressed with themselves for reasons only they understood while they tried to decide whether to search her folder or let her go, and finally one officer asked what was inside it, and Arya answered gently that it contained important documents for work, nothing more and nothing less. But again the officers acted as if her work could not possibly hold weight, and Arya felt a small sadness for them because they failed to see beyond the surface, and she stood quietly as they debated among themselves about whether to check the folder while the evening light stretched across the street and cast long shadows near their feet, and Arya remained steady thinking of how often people judged without knowing, and how quickly small power could make someone ignore respect and fairness, and finally the moment arrived when she felt it was time to shift the scene, and she reached toward her identification card still in the officer's hand, and said in the same gentle tone that had never wavered that they should take a closer look at the line under her name, the one they had not bothered to read, and she watched as the officer lifted the card once more, letting his eyes fall on the title printed clearly beneath her name, a title that carried authority earned through years of hard work, a title that could reshape the entire moment once they understood its meaning, and Arya waited in calm silence, holding the same peaceful posture, while the truth sat right in front of them ready to reveal itself and change everything about the way they had decided to treat her long before they ever knew who she was. The officer holding Arya's identification felt his breath tighten as he finally understood the line he had ignored before because the card clearly stated her position as a federal judge. And the weight of that title fell over him like a sudden storm, while his partner leaned closer with wide eyes, unable to believe how quickly their careless attitude had turned into a serious moment that demanded respect and responsibility, and Arya observed their reactions without raising her voice because she knew that truth often spoke louder than anger, and she stood calmly with her folder pressed against her arm while the breeze moved softly through the quiet street, making the officers shift uncomfortably as they realized how poorly they had handled the situation, and the first officer swallowed slowly trying to find the right words, but his voice came out uneven as he attempted to explain himself, even though no explanation could change the way they had acted toward her moments earlier, and Arya simply listened with a gentle expression that carried neither pride nor irritation, only a steady patience that made the officers more nervous because they understood that she had shown them more dignity than they had shown her, and the second officer stepped forward trying to correct the situation by adjusting his posture, and speaking in a respectful tone that seemed forced but sincere as he apologized for their misunderstanding, while the first officer returned her identification with trembling hands, realizing that he had nearly embarrassed himself and his department in a way that could follow him for a long time. Arya accepted her card with a calm nod, reminding herself that people often revealed who they were not with grand actions but with small moments of choice, and she felt a quiet strength rise within her, not because of her title, but because she had faced the moment with grace despite their assumptions. And one officer asked softly if she needed any assistance or an escort to her car, hoping to repair the damage, though Arya declined politely because she preferred to walk on her own terms, and the officers stepped back, creating space for her as she moved past them with steady footsteps while they watched her with a mixture of respect and regret, unable to fully understand how she had maintained such composure after their careless behavior. And Arya continued down the sidewalk, aware that their eyes followed her, and she felt a gentle ache in her heart, not for herself, but for the world where quick judgment often overshadowed fairness. And she reached her car, unlocking it with smooth, calm motions while she heard the officers whisper behind her, unsure how to speak about the moment they had just lived, and she placed her folder on the passenger seat before pausing to gather her thoughts, because the encounter reminded her of why she worked so hard to ensure justice was not simply a word, but a practice that reached every street and every person. And as she sat behind the wheel, she breathed slowly, letting the weight of the experience settle, while the evening light wrapped around her like a soft reminder that strength did not always need to be loud. Sometimes it lived in quiet choices and patient actions. And Arya started her car, gently watching the officers from her mirror as they stayed rooted in the same spot, their faces still marked with the shock of discovery, and she wondered how long it would take for them to reflect on their behavior, and whether this moment would inspire them to look at others with more respect in the future. And she hoped it would, because change often began with a single experience that forced someone to see beyond the surface. And she drove forward with steady hands, feeling the road beneath her tires as she moved toward home, carrying not frustration but a thoughtful silence. And soon the buildings around her softened under the warm evening colors, while her mind replayed the moment when the officers first approached her, and she wished they had chosen kindness from the start. Arya drove through the evening roads with a steady heart and a thoughtful mind as the gentle lights of the city stretched across the windows of her car, and she reflected on how quickly situations could shift when truth replaced assumption. And she reminded herself that dignity was not something others gave, but something a person carried from within, and she carried it with quiet strength as she reached her home, a peaceful place filled with warm colors, soft shadows, and the calm presence she had created over many years. And as she stepped inside, she placed her folder on the table and allowed the silence of her home to settle around her like a comforting blanket, giving her the space to breathe after a long day. And she walked to the small balcony overlooking the street, where a slow wind moved through the evening air, bringing with it the distant sound of children laughing and neighbors speaking in gentle tones, which reminded her that even though the world held moments of misunderstanding, it also held simple pieces of kindness that kept it balanced. And she stood there for a long moment, thinking about the officers and how their expressions had changed when they learned who she was, and she knew that their reaction came not from respect for her as a person, but from the weight of her position. And that thought carried a quiet sadness, because she believed true respect should be offered to every human being regardless of title, clothing, or appearance. And she leaned against the balcony railing, letting the soft air calm her thoughts while she thought about her journey becoming a federal judge, a path filled with hard work, long nights, and countless moments where she had been underestimated, yet she had continued pushing forward with patience and determination, always choosing to rise above negativity instead of letting it shape her. And as she stood there, she felt a deep sense of purpose return to her, because she knew that her role was not only to make legal decisions but also to influence the world through her actions, both inside and outside the courtroom. And she hoped that her calm response during the encounter would stay in the officers' minds long enough to change the way they approached people in the future. And while she reflected, her phone buzzed on the table inside, and she walked back in to see a message from her colleague Daniel, who often checked on her after long days, and he asked if she arrived home safely. and she replied with a simple reassurance, choosing not to describe what had happened, because she did not wish to turn the moment into a story for sympathy, and instead she preferred to focus on what she could learn from it, and how it might shape her future decisions. Then she made herself a warm drink, and sat on the soft couch where the quiet of the room helped her release the tension she had carried, and she thought about the upcoming cases she had to review the next morning, cases involving real people who depended on fairness, honesty, and truth, which reminded her again why she valued her work so deeply, and as she rested she felt a sense of gratitude for the strength she had built over the years, a strength that allowed her to face unfair treatment with grace instead of anger, and the memory of the officer's expressions returned to her mind, not with bitterness but with the hope that they would reflect on their choices and grow from the moment, because growth often came from unexpected lessons, and she wondered if they were discussing the encounter even now, perhaps questioning themselves, perhaps realizing the importance of approaching every person with respect, and she hoped they would take the moments seriously enough to change their way of thinking, because small change in a single person could become steady change in an entire community, and the thought brought her a quiet. The next morning arrived with soft sunlight touching the walls of Aria's home, and she woke with a clearer mind as the quiet strength she carried reminded her that every new day held the chance to guide the world toward fairness and understanding, and she prepared for work with calm movements, choosing a light outfit and gathering her documents with steady hands before stepping outside into the gentle morning air, where the streets felt peaceful, and the soft sounds of birds filled the space around her, and she walked toward her car with the calm determination she always held, knowing that her role in the courthouse was not only about making decisions, but also about shaping how people were treated inside those walls. And as she drove through the streets she could not help thinking about the officers from the previous evening, wondering if they had spent the night reflecting on their actions, and whether the moment had stirred something deeper inside them that would stay with them for years to come. And when she reached the courthouse she walked through the main door with her usual steady grace, greeting the staff with warm nods as she moved toward her chambers, where her desk waited with neatly arranged files ready for review, and she settled into her chair, allowing the morning silence to wrap around her before opening the first case file, which involved a young man facing trouble because of misunderstanding, and she felt a strong sense of responsibility as she read the details, because she knew that fair judgment had the power to shape a life, and she reminded herself again that every person deserved to be seen with clarity and respect, no matter their background, appearance, or circumstance. And as she reviewed the documents a soft knock sounded on her door, and she looked up to see one of the courthouse officers stepping inside holding a small envelope in his hand, and he explained that someone had left it at the front desk early that morning and requested it be delivered to her, and Arya accepted it with gentle curiosity, opening it slowly to reveal a handwritten note inside, and as she unfolded the paper she recognized the handwriting as belonging to the officer from the previous evening, and the message expressed sincere apology and reflection, saying he had spent the night thinking about the way he treated her and how wrong it was to form assumptions about any person, and he promised to carry the lesson forward into every future interaction, both in uniform and beyond. And Arya felt a warm sense of hope rise inside her, because the note showed genuine growth and understanding, and she appreciated the courage it took for him to write it, because admitting mistakes was not always easy, especially when it involved facing one's own behavior. And she placed the note gently inside her drawer as a reminder that even difficult moments could lead to positive change when met with patience and dignity. And she returned to her work with renewed purpose, determined to let the experience strengthen her commitment to fairness and kindness in every decision she made throughout the day. And as time passed she continued reviewing cases, meeting with her team, and guiding discussions with clarity and calm leadership, and everyone around her admired the balance she carried between firmness and compassion, though few knew how much strength it required to maintain that balance. And later in the afternoon she stepped into her courtroom where a new session was about to begin, and she took her place at the bench, allowing her presence to bring a quiet order to the room while people settled into their seats with hopeful, nervous, or determined expressions. And as the session continued she listened carefully to each voice, making sure no one felt unheard, because she believed justice could not exist without understanding. And as she guided the proceedings she remained aware that her influence extended far beyond the courtroom because every person who entered this space carried the memory of how they were treated, and those memories shaped how they treated others, and when the session ended she stepped outside the courtroom feeling the gentle satisfaction of a day lived with purpose and truth, and she walked through the quiet hallway letting the sunlight from the high windows warm her shoulders as she reflected on how the events of the past 24 hours had woven themselves into a meaningful reminder that respectful action created lasting change, and before leaving the courthouse she paused at the main entrance looking out at the evening sky which now carried soft colors that reminded her of the beauty found in patience, understanding and growth, and she stepped forward with steady steps ready to return home knowing that the world always held room for improvement, and every person had the power to guide it in a better direction through small moments of kindness, fairness, and courage, and as she walked to her car she felt certain that the lesson she had offered unknowingly the night before had already begun shaping new paths in minds beyond her own, and that thought filled her with a calm hope that would carry her into many days yet to come. Arya drove home that evening with a calm heart, as the soft colors of the sky followed her along the road, and she felt a deep sense of peace knowing that even a difficult experience could guide people toward better choices when met with patience and understanding. And when she reached her home she stepped inside and allowed the quiet warmth of her living room to welcome her after a day filled with responsibility and purpose, and she placed her folder on the table and stood near the window for a moment watching the gentle movement of the trees outside as she reflected on everything that had unfolded over the past 2 days, and she realized that the moment with the officers was not simply an uncomfortable memory but a turning point for them and for her, because it reminded her that the influence of character could reach far beyond the courtroom and continue shaping the world in unexpected places. And she walked to the kitchen and prepared a small meal, moving slowly and thoughtfully as she reminded herself that progress often came in small steps and sometimes the smallest interactions carried the greatest lessons. And after she finished her meal she sat on the couch with a warm drink between her hands, letting her mind replay the note she had received that morning from the officer who had treated her unfairly the night before, and she admired the honesty he had shown by admitting his mistake, because she believed that genuine growth began with acknowledgement and courage, and she hoped his reflection would spread to others around him, creating a ripple that encouraged more respectful behavior in the community. And as she rested she thought about her own journey, and how many times she had been judged, misunderstood, or underestimated. Yet she chose every time to rise above negativity, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary for the world she wanted to build, and that world was one where every person was seen with sincerity, kindness, and dignity, whether they carried a title or not. And she stood up from the couch and walked to her study where books lined the shelves and documents rested neatly on her desk, and she sat down in her chair feeling the comforting weight of her responsibilities as she opened a small notebook she used only for personal reflection, and she began writing about the events that had taken place, describing not the frustration she could have felt, but the quiet victory of knowing she had handled the moment with grace. And she wrote about the importance of responding with calm strength, especially in situations where others acted with thoughtlessness, and she described how patience often revealed the truth more clearly than confrontation, and how every person deserved a chance to learn, even when their actions fell short of fairness. And as she wrote, she felt the lessons take root inside her like seeds that would grow and guide her for years to come, and she knew that she would carry this experience into her future decisions, especially when faced with moments that required careful understanding and strong compassion. And after finishing her reflection she closed the notebook gently and placed it back on the shelf before stepping onto her balcony, where the evening breeze brushed against her face and carried with it the faint sound of distant traffic blending softly with the quiet of her neighborhood, and she leaned on the railing feeling grateful for the strength she had built over the years, strength shaped not by power but by patience, resilience, and the determination to treat every person with respect. And as she looked up at the sky she imagined the officers driving through their nightly patrol, perhaps remembering the encounter, perhaps choosing to speak to someone with more care because the moment with her had left an imprint on their minds, and she hoped they would use that lesson every day, choosing fairness over assumption, understanding over judgment. And she smiled gently because she believed people could grow when given the chance, and she was glad she had offered that chance without anger or bitterness. And standing there she felt a quiet understanding settle in her heart that the world did not change in one moment, but it could change through Many small moments continued with courage and kindness, and she knew she would continue to play her part in guiding that change both inside her courtroom and in the everyday spaces of life where respect mattered just as much. And as the evening turned into night, Arya stepped back inside her home, feeling the calm embrace of the quiet rooms around her, and she reminded herself that the strength she carried would continue to shine through her actions and inspire others to look beyond quick assumptions and into the deeper truth that every person deserved dignity and fairness. And with that peaceful thought, she prepared to rest, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to lead with the same steady grace that had guided her through every moment of her journey. And she drifted into sleep with a calm heart, certain that the world had taken a small step forward because of a simple moment handled with patience and truth.